All right, welcome everyone to our informational meeting this afternoon regarding the pre-K expansion grant. I'm Leanne Larson. I direct the early learning team in the Department of Education, and it's very nice to have all of you joining us this afternoon. This is an opportunity for us to give a little bit of a preview about the preschool expansion grant. We will hold another informational meeting after the request for applications is released later in the summer. And that's the more formal informational meeting. And we have to be a lot more careful about how we are able to answer questions and what we can and cannot talk about at that time. So we thought it might be nice if we gave a little preview that was a little bit more informal, and that might help to address questions that people have currently as they're starting to think about the opportunity. So we're going to start this afternoon with just some introductions of some of the folks on our early learning team who are involved in the expansion grants. And then Nicole and I will tag team giving a bit of an overview about the grants. And then we've invited a couple of our school systems that were receivers of grants in the first round to talk a little bit about their experience so far and some of their insights related to the process. And then we want to make sure that we leave time for folks to ask questions. So we will do our very best. I think we shouldn't have any difficulty getting everything into an hour, and may even end a little early if we don't have a lot of questions. So with that said, I'm going to invite some of the other members of our team to introduce themselves, and I'll turn it over to Nicole Medore first.
Thanks, Leanne. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nicole Medore. I'm the early childhood specialist.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Marcy Whitcomb. I am the public pre-K consultant.
Good afternoon. I'm Nina Cunningham. I'm the Head Start State Collaboration Director on the Early Learning team at DOE.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Hicks. I am the Children's Cabinet Coordinator, and I'm work out of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, and working closely with the Early Learning team on these grants.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jane Kersling, and I am a contract grant specialist for the pre-K expansion grant.
Great. So as you can tell, we have a really nice team with lots of support for this grant opportunity, which is great. All right, Nicole, thank you. So the first thing that we want to share is that the funding for this grant opportunity is coming from the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. And it's a pool of about $10 million in total for us to use to support expansion of public preschool opportunities for eligible 4-year-olds in our state. And that can happen through either startup of programs if an SAU does not currently have a public pre-K program. It could be to expand an already existing program. And it could also include shifting from offering part day, part week programming to full day, full week programming. So there are several different options available for use through these funds. But the overarching goal is really to increase access for 4-year-olds in our state to high quality public pre-K programming. We, as part of the design of the grants, structured it to support these types of startups and expansions, both in the 2022-23 school year, as well as in the 23-24 school year. So last fall, we ran the first round of grant funding, and 12 SAUs were awarded grants to support expansion in the coming school year, so 22-23. And that has utilized about $2 million of that $10 million that was available. That round of grants happened pretty quickly last fall, and we know that that didn't necessarily give SAUs a whole lot of time to gear up for the process. So we are hopeful that having the better part of a year to be thinking about that will make this next round one that even more SAUs are able to take part in. So we are planning for this second round of grants to happen over the course of late summer into the early fall. And then those awarded grants will support implementation in the following school year, 23-24. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, one of the caveats about the use of the funds is that they do need to support pre-K expansion for eligible students. And to be eligible, a student has to have turned 4 by October 15th of the school year in which they're enrolled. And that is per statute. So it's kind of one of those non-negotiables. Additionally, there is an expectation that the students who are being served through this opportunity, there needs to be a very inclusive approach taken. So eligible 4-year-olds need to include those who are economically disadvantaged, children who have identified disabilities, as well as multilingual learners. Additionally, any project that is proposed and funded has to be in compliance with the basic approval standards for public pre-K programs, or as we often refer to it, Chapter 124. So all of those are non-negotiables in terms of putting together a project for this grant. Additionally, SAUs are strongly encouraged to consider developing partnerships as one of the strategies for providing public pre-K programming, and that can be with licensed community providers. Those providers might be Head Start programs, they could be private childcare programs or private pre-K programs. It's also possible that SAUs could get together and develop a pre-K program that is shared between the SAUs. It's possible for SAUs to offer that programming not only in their schools if they have space, but they may also look for facilities within their community. We recognize that one of the barriers that some SAUs have had to getting pre-K programming off the ground is a lack of space in their buildings. And so funding from this grant can be used for leasing space in other facilities within a community in which a school system would be able to run pre-K programming. Regardless of whether you're in partnership or not, though, an SAU will be remaining the responsible party for the implementation of the grants and will be the fiscal agent for all grant funds. Another piece that's very important to keep in mind with this pool of grant funding is that the intention is for SAUs to combine the grant funding with funding that they will be receiving as they are enrolling 4-year-olds into their programming through the Essential Programs and Services or EPS formula. So there will be state and local allocation established, and that amount of funding will be subtracted from the overall cost of a project so that what's remaining is what can be asked for in grant funding. And that's important to keep in mind. The grant is structured that way to help build sustainability with programming so that SAUs are planning for long-term implementation of their programs. And calculating that piece of information is something that our school finance team is able to help all applicants figure out as they're putting applications in.
So another area to keep in mind, once you're ready to submit your application for the grant funding, there are 3 areas that the review team will be looking at in terms of competitive priorities. So school districts that are applying that meet one or all of these bullets that I'll mention in just a moment will receive additional points on their overall application score. So one thing that is worth more points is the formation of partnerships between SAUs and community providers to provide public pre-K. Like Leanne mentioned earlier, you might house your pre-K program at your school, you might house it in a community space, but if you're providing programming with a partner, a Head Start partner, a licensed childcare partner, whatever it may be, then that is one area where competitive points will be provided. Another area is specifically serving higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students. So there you'll see on the application when it's released that there's a spot to identify your current economically disadvantaged percentage, and then of course your goals within the pre-K program for serving such students as well. And the third competitive priority area is increasing the amount of weekly programming beyond the 10-hour minimum. So Chapter 124, our program standards, requires that in order to receive funding through the EPS formula, your pre-K program must be offered for at least 10 hours a week. That's the minimum. But there's many opportunities for programs to be offered for more hours per week than just the 10. So school districts that are offering on a full day, full week sort of dosage every week, repeating myself, will receive a priority point for that as well. So the funding provided through the RFA grant can be used in a variety of ways. So this is just an example of some that we've seen come in the current grant, and some things to be considering as you can start to think about the school year and what you might need the funding for. So first and foremost, you certainly can use it for purchasing equipment, materials, and supplies for classrooms and playgrounds. You might need to use the funding to retrofit classroom spaces. Many of our schools are old and outdated, and they might not have bathrooms or a water source or natural lighting, things like that. You might need to establish or retrofit playgrounds to accommodate younger, smaller students. You may need it to lease space in the community for operating more classrooms. Some schools, especially during the COVID years, were looking to expand their outdoor learning classroom spaces. So certainly that's a consideration here. Providing snacks and meals, providing transportation. Transportation could be to and from school, or it might just be in one direction. Another allowable expense is coordinating public pre-K programming, particularly in the case of programs operated in partnership with community providers. Providing professional learning to your teachers and staff, as well as, again, if you're operating within a partnership, coordinating with those partners around professional learning opportunities as well. So salary and benefits, this is specific. So salary and benefits can only, funding for those can only be used for education technician positions. So in school districts that are starting full day, full week pre-K programs. So the funding through this grant cannot be used for the lead teacher salary or benefits, nor can it be used for the ed tech in a part day or a part week scenario. So only if you're operating full day, full week, and only in that case for the ed tech positions. Also, if you're expanding from part day to full day, full week, again, only for the ed tech position. That lead teacher salary and benefit will be the responsibility of the SAU and or partner. So once the application is released, it does have some really specific components. So it'll start off likely with some general information, much like the information we're providing today. It'll be there to just provide more information as far as the assurances for receiving funding, any letters of intent from partners, things like that. Another component that you'll see are the needs assessment and community coordination. So this is the community coordination piece is a requirement under Chapter 124. So whether you're operating a public pre-K program with or without this funding, that community coordination is required. For this particular project, we do ask that applicants conduct a needs assessment. There's no necessarily right or wrong way to do that. We do have some resources and thoughts that we offer to school districts that are looking to conduct a needs assessment. Certainly the point is to gather information from those in your community that might access your pre-K program, gathering information from them in terms of how many students or children they have that might access it, their ages, their individual needs, their learning needs, their family's needs in terms of before and after childcare, full day programming versus half day programming, things like that, needs around transportation, etc. The application also provides a project overview as well as a project description. So there'll be really detailed information in there for each of those components. The program description does go into further detail around program design, as well as the option for partnerships and what's required there. Some strategies around your recruitment and enrollment, how you intend to do those, and program evaluation. That's something that our internal team is working on currently as well to provide more resources and support around. And perhaps most importantly, we want to make sure that these public pre-K programs that you're starting under this funding stay, that they sustain year after year. So it becomes a constant within your community, a high quality option for families. So that's going to be another piece that we're looking for in the application. The budget in the application is also very specific in terms of what is it that you're going to need money for, sort of really clearly. And then it'll break that down into where is that, how are those items going to be paid for? What's going to be the responsibility of the grant funding? What will your local funds through the EPS formula, what will those be used to support financially? If you have a partner, how is the partner financially contributing? Things like that. So all main school districts, or excuse me, main administrative units are defined under 20A MRS. All of those are eligible to submit a proposal under this RFA. The department does anticipate making multiple awards. That's our hope. That's our goal. We anticipate that the number and size of those awards will depend on the number of proposals that we receive and the available funds to support those, much like this current round. It's hard to estimate the range. We say anywhere between 20,000 and 500,000. That's really going to come down to each individual application and what is being proposed as far as programming within that. Certainly, this current round of awardees fell within that range. Award amounts in the approved grant requests will be finalized in February of 2023, which seems like forever from now. But that timeline is really specific. It's in alignment with our financial team and when they typically get their EPS allocations finalized. So then we can really sort of fine tune each grant award and make sure that we've got everything covered and accurate. I'm gonna hand it to you, Leanne.
Helps if I unmute. Thank you, Nicole. All right, so we wanted to offer an opportunity for all of you to hear a little bit from a couple of our current grantees. So we have invited representatives from MSAD 54, and I don't know why it didn't pull through, but also from Yarmouth. And I apologize, Shanna, from Yarmouth, because I thought that was on there and it didn't pull it up. Not sure why, but we've invited both of these school systems to tell us a little bit about their perspectives around the application process from when they experienced it last year, any helpful strategies or lessons learned that they might want to offer. And then they'll also be available during the question period that'll come right after this. So Nicole, I'm thinking that it might be helpful for us to stop sharing the slides during this point, just so people can see each other a little bit more easily. Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask Mark Hatch and Nicole Chaplin, who are representing MSAD 54, if they will kick us off with a little bit of their thinking.
Thanks for asking us to be here. I'm going to let Nicole talk a little bit about the application process. We've had a collaborative connection with KVCAP and have for years. And so we work together to offer our pre-K programs. And what we were doing is we did the expansion grant to increase one classroom in a particular outlying school in our district that has always had a need and had a waiting list for pre-K. And so we had actually expanded before the grant some additional classrooms in our district. So this was the one that went under the grant. So I don't know, Nicole, if you want to talk a little bit about the grant process and.
Sure. And I apologize if I'm echoey. My office has really high ceilings. For us, the grant process really was a joint effort. So I'm sorry, my name is Nicole. I work for Kennebec Valley Community Action Program. We are a Head Start agency, and as Mark mentioned, we've been collaborative partners for actually well over a decade. So we have a long-standing relationship with this district. We're very aware of the trends of enrollment in the community, the demographics, all those pieces that you really probably would assess before expanding. We have that background knowledge together. So for us, the application process really was a joint effort. Both of us working on it from all perspectives, whether it was from the program description or the budget, and really working together to compile both of those pieces. I think, and Mark, please add to this, but I think for us, one of the most challenging parts of the application was the budget and really figuring out where things fell. Leanne and Nicole were incredibly helpful and more than willing to support us through that process. But I think that's probably where we stumbled a little bit in the application process.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think part of that was getting the solid numbers from the state as to what the allocation would be, because part of this grant means that your 279 will have the students that you anticipate being in the class in your calculation when you get your 279 for the coming year. So you're getting that funding that way. And so factoring in all the funding coming in and then separating out what was going to which piece and which part of the program was being paid from which pot of money was a little tricky to work through. But again, what I think I would just say again is everybody at the state through this process did a great job at helping us clarify those things. There was a period of time where they can't help a whole lot. And because it's a competitive grant. And so there's this period of time where they aren't allowed to be as helpful, but once we got through that piece, they answered any questions we had about the budget, they adjusted that, and they looked at our overall proposal. So I was really nervous about the fact that if my budget wasn't nailed right down, that might impact the grant. That did not seem to be the case. And we actually, when we finally worked on things after the grants were awarded, we were able to go through a process to finalize the budget and make some adjustments to make sure that it was lined up correctly. So that ended up just taking a little bit more time, but I think it was a really good process, and it was good to know that there's time to adjust that after getting the grant before you finally sign off on everything as well.
Thanks so much, Mark and Nicole. Shanna, are you right there?
Yes, happy to help.
Great.
Hi, I'm Shauna Crofton. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning here in Yarmouth. So I would just echo a lot of actually what has already been said. Yarmouth was in a bit of a different situation because pre-K wasn't actually already in place. So when we submitted for the grant, it was really to get public pre-K into the system. I would say that the work very collaborative in terms of not just the grant, but I would say the support for pre-K in general. It was interesting coming, this is my first year in Yarmouth. So coming into the community, really understanding the dynamics between current pre-K providers and just introducing a public program. So one of the first pieces that was done here is really communication with the private pre-Ks. Here there's only about 8 or 9 that are actually in Yarmouth that work directly with us. And I would say we were lucky because the support was really strong for the addition of public pre-K. And they agreed that there really was a need. So that helped. And I wouldn't say that's the case everywhere, right? So I know that can be a layer of challenge. When we were framing the grant, what we tried to do is really figure out how many students would be coming in, and this was referenced in the last overview. We had about 105 that really said they're interested in public pre-K, and so we had to frame it based on a maximum number, which was 96, knowing that this first year we're not going to get 96 students, just because of the whole time about when you find out about the grant and then being able to advertise and open, and that was really difficult in terms of the budgeting piece. And so I think what we really had tried to do is just frame it with a thought that we're going with 3 classrooms. We're going to work towards 3 classrooms and adjust if we can't get there. And I say 3 with 2 part-time sessions in each. And right now we've ended up with currently 57 who have enrolled. And we still feel okay about our budget. One of the things when we were looking at the budget piece is here, really a lot of that focus was on all startup costs. So curriculum materials, so really looking and vetting through what curriculum we're going to be using, and then making sure that we can get as much in prior to just make sure that the classrooms are well outfitted and that they're prepped for the beginning. One of the pieces that we've kind of grappled with here is playground. So we didn't have a really good sized playground for that particular age group. And we did include a request for that in our grant, which we were happy did come through. One thing I would just say is that we grossly underestimated the cost of renovation of the soil beneath the actual playground. So we really put our grant in terms of the equipment, did a lot of research about installation. But just if that's something that you're looking to include in the future, I would definitely highlight that as an area to get an appropriate just quote on what that might look like. And I'm just trying to think of other things that I might highlight that weren't already said, but I think any questions that we've had, 2 things I would say, state has been incredibly responsive, just very much so, and very supportive. And that's been incredibly helpful. The other thing that I've found really useful is actually just our colleagues reaching out. And I'll use an example. When we were trying to do our budget, we actually reached out to a couple of districts who had just expanded to pre-K and added that in. And everybody was very willing to share what they had used, and some right down to the detailed lists of the orders they use for curriculum materials. So I would just offer that if anybody is in that point, feel free to reach out, because people are happy to share. I'm happy to share as well. And I did find that that was really helpful, so we wouldn't have to start from scratch.
Yeah. One of the really nice parts about living and working in our state is, I think, just how sharing most folks are, and really supportive and willing to help out whenever they can. And we certainly will often recommend to school systems, other school systems that they might turn to, who might be have faced similar challenges or are of a similar size, or located in a particular region of the state and are dealing with similar contexts that can be good thought partners along the way. So I appreciate that, you offering that, Shanna, because I think that is so important to the whole learning process for all of us. Yeah. Great. All right, maybe what we could do now is open it up to some questions from anyone who's listening, anything that you're wondering about. Nicole, I don't know if you can adjust the screen so that we can. I'm sure that was my time of the day that the internet goes down. Sorry about that, everybody. Nicole, can you take Shanna off the hot seat for a second and so we can all see each other a little bit better?
I thought I had at this point. On my screen, she's off.
Now you're front and center.
I think
if
it's how you
everyone
got
just
your
hits their,
view.
hits
I
their
think it's just the
gallery view.
view.
Yeah, if everyone hits their gallery view, they'll get everyone at once.
Yeah. Okay, there we go. All right. So we want to open it up now for questions or wonderings from anyone. What are you thinking about or wondering?
I raised my hand. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
definitely.
didn't know if you
Sorry,
wanted the
I
hand
wondered
raised
where
or
you went
what.
on the screen,
Or
Heather.
just jump in, or yeah.
Yes, jump right in.
So I was quite curious with Shanna and your conversations around playgrounds, and that is something that we're definitely considering when we were thinking about our proposal, and would love to just know a little bit more. What did you think about when you were thinking about the design and the structure of your playground?
So I can actually share a presentation with you that we've done that will probably be helpful, because what the focus I would say here, and it was a committee. So this is really the work of a lot of teachers as well as some local providers. And then we had the playground folks come in and help. But really it was in terms of I would say gross and fine motor skills, imaginative play, creative play, and then also having some spaces that were specifically carved out for peaceful, quiet time. So if a student wanted to be able to separate and having some musical instruments or something of that nature, it was over in a section versus coming in, which would have more of the, I would say, the social section. And the layout was kind of designed like that to be highly interactive, but then also some of the play elements that were brought in were intentional in the sense of wanting the kids to figure out how they're going to play with these and be creative in what they do. What I would say I think is good about it is that it's got different sections and that it's got different pieces of equipment. I think they all flow pretty well together. The particular layout of the area itself that we have was a bit of a challenge, just because we've got a pathway that's literally right in the middle. One of the other pieces that we really thought about, it went back and forth on, I mean, it seems simplistic, but swings. There was a big debate about what kind of swings would be the best for that particular age group. And there's some pieces in there about in the presentation. And then the other one that we talked a lot about was Sandpits. And so this is, and I know again, it sounds simple, but we went back and forth about, do we want to have sand or not, because of like bringing that back into the schools, and the reasons why that truly, like why teachers wanted it, really did overrule. And so we looked at doing both a flat ground one and a raised bed for access. So inclusion was really, I would say, a driver of the setup. We have just, I would say, some challenges with our current playground where we don't feel it's as inclusive as we would have liked. So this one, in terms of creating it, I think that was sort of the framework going in to start. So I'll share it with you. I'll send you an email and happy to share with others as well.
Sandboxes are always a hot topic.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I was a high school principal, so this is new. Like, I never knew
So
that.
we all live in Maine, and another issue with sandboxes is that cats love them.
So, and I'll add to that too, Nicole and Shanna, when, you know, in the past, outside of this particular project, when we work with school districts around adding pre-K students to their schools, this topic of playgrounds comes up, rightly so. It's an important one to think about. But in my experience, we typically butt up against the barrier that is your custodian or your head maintenance person, because they're thinking snow removal, ice collection sections, they're thinking puddles, they're thinking danger with sticks or rocks or heavy equipment, right? And we're thinking little kids outdoor exploring, enjoying each other's company, etc. So we've got to somehow morph both of those into a spot that makes sense and is agreeable to everybody. I know schools and children alike love the huge equipment, right? With the slides and the bridges and the rock walls. They're gorgeous. They're hugely expensive and not necessary for every playground, quite honestly. Certainly, if that's what your school and community wants on your playground, I would never stop you from exploring that, but don't feel like that's what a pre-K playground has to have. As students love just space to run, spaces to dig, spaces to ride a trike, spaces to draw on chalk, right? That is just as exciting and educational as climbing. And some of those climbing structures have really specific physical capabilities or inabilities, quite honestly, and are rated by age, which if you really want to have a 1-hour session, we can chat about that, because it's one of my biggest pet peeves, because age has nothing to do with the child's ability when it comes to climbing, right? A 4-year-old can scale a rock climbing wall just as well as a 10-year-old could. So I get sort of my blood's boiling. So anyways, don't feel like money has to be spent on equipment structure. It could just as well be spent on a really beautiful outdoor space that has, safety and walking and hard surfaces and soft surfaces and things like that.
I would also add to that, a lot of times less is more.
Yep.
And so thinking about your outdoor space probably very differently than maybe you have in the past. And I would definitely encourage you to reach out to your peers and think about visiting some of their outdoor spaces. And if you need some recommendations, we can definitely give you some and really help you kind of reimagine what an outdoor space could look like. And it's not going to cost you the thousands of dollars to buy the plastic jungle gym, right? That a lot of times children get hurt with some of those giant structures.
And the other thing with those structures too, a lot of playgrounds have them and they're lovely, and families access them on the weekends or outside of school time. But then during school, if you're really committed to, it's rated for a 5-year-old, so a 4-year-old can't go on it, that's going to be really hard. It's not impossible, but a sort of lesson for that student to learn. I can use this on Saturday and Sunday with mom and dad, but I'm not allowed to use it Monday through Friday with my teacher, right? So those sorts of things need to be considered as well.
And the only other piece I was just going to add, we did a couple of visits to some really, really nice outdoor, I call them natural playgrounds, which were wonderful spaces, really great.
Yeah.
Feedback, I will say, from building administrators was that they were very, very difficult to maintain. And sometimes challenging to the point where they weren't used as much as they would like. So it led to like a conversation around, and I mean, again, it sounds simple, but access to trees, like getting out and being out in, if possible, around trees, and then gardens, if it's gardens that are on site, having them kids be able to dig in them. I mean, again, simple, but as opposed to custodial services or grounds crew trying to keep up.
Yep. Agreed.
Lots and lots of things to think about, for sure.
Yeah.
Great question, Heather. What else are you wondering about?
I'm wondering, are most schools or districts focusing half-day programs, full-day programs? I mean, we're running half-day programs in 2 classrooms, so 4 separate sessions. And what does the sort of structure of that look like in a full-day session if someone does? Or are folks partnering with other programs where maybe the children go to something that's less structured in the second half of the day? Just trying to determine what that looks like.
That's a great question.
Every time I had asked that.
So we do run school day programming in all our locations. We are using OWL curriculum, transitioning to pre-K for me. And there's variations of structure throughout the day. So there's structured time, there's a little bit more free time, but it's not like one portion of the day is academic and then the other is free play or choice time. It's kind of all woven in together throughout the day. And children actually do very well with it. I know sometimes parents are concerned or even staff are concerned that 4-year-olds can't go to school all day. They really do very well with it. We do have nap time. halfway through the day. And we offer 2 meals in the full day programs, and in some locations also a snack in the afternoon. Outside twice a day in the full day. But they really do very well with it.
I'd say that also that one of the things that we hear is that those programs that transition from part day to full day actually find it much easier because they're not trying to cram in everything that they want to do in that 3.5, 4 hour time frame, however long your half day session is. So they actually have time to let the children really engage in their work and their play, and teachers don't feel so constricted with making sure that they get everything in.
The other thing we found is children spend less time transitioning.
That's what I was going to say,
In
Nicole.
part day, they're like trying to cram everything in, and the children transition a lot.
Yeah, because sometimes in part day programming, they may be starting their day in leaving home to go to a childcare, to then go to the pre-K program, to then go back to childcare, to then finally go home. And that's a lot of transitions for young children in the course of a the length of a typical day.
The other thing we found is that in years past, we've offered part day and full day in different locations, and families want full day because it's free full day programming. And when we've had the 2 choices, it's the full day programs that will fill before the part day.
And I was just going to say that in Yarmouth currently, the part-time that we have was decided really to serve maximize the number of kids that we can serve. All that being said, the biggest concerns that we've got right now are we going to be serving the kids that we really know we need to be serving most? And I say that because it's getting kids access to that and then to another program. We've had providers that have been really responsive to saying like, okay, we'll work with the schedule. That being said, sometimes the cost is actually higher for part-time programming than it is for full-time programming. So we're trying to track this year some data to figure out whether or not we would stay with that part-time or go full-time. But that's a very, I think, realistic fear that we've got, and we just don't know how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
Right.
One thing I'd add is that the full day programming does allow you, if you have the staffing availability, to look at things like art or music in your pre-K program. Whereas in a half day, the day's just so short, you really, even if you had the staffing, it would be very difficult to do.
And I think it all often points back to that needs assessment that we talked a bit about earlier, and how important that is to understand your community. What do families really need? How are you making sure that the students who are the most vulnerable and really need this experience are getting the opportunity, and then making some decisions about what you can put together and how can you maximize the space to accommodate for full day programming if possible, kind of weighing all of those different benefits and costs in making the decision. I can share that of the 12 SAUs that were awarded grants in this first round, I believe, and Nicole, you can correct me on this if I get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure that 11 of the 12 are offering full day, full week programming.
Correct.
And a number of those are expansions from current offerings of part day, part week to full day, full week programming.
The other barrier just to consider if you're doing part day program, or it was a barrier for us, we do not provide transportation for children. So for parents driving back and forth in that short amount of time in the middle of the day, beginning of the day, whenever it was, really was a challenge. Being able to bring them to school in the morning and not having to come back until the end of the day was definitely a benefit for parents.
I definitely think transportation will come up. We're currently providing it in the half-day programs. But I believe that at least one way they're riding with the entire, we're a very, smaller district, so they're riding K-12. So that's always something that brings a lot of emotion to the table.
And that was definitely consideration amongst a number of the grantees in the first round. And some actually are using some of their funding to help support bus monitors or bus aides in situations where there are, you know, a lot of older students and just wanting to make sure that the younger children are feeling safe and comfortable. But those are decisions, you know, that get made on kind of a case-by-case basis within each school and what's your context.
Danette, I don't know if you were asking for like DOE data at the beginning of your question. So we sort of look at it as a full day program is offered at least 5 hours a day and then 5 days a week to be full week. So if you offer 5 hours, at least 5 hours a day for 5 days a week, that's 25 hours or more would be considered full day, full week, right? So if you're looking at it from a data percentage point, still only, even with this RFA grant awardees, it's about 42% of programs offer full day, full week. So we're creeping close to that 50-50, but the remaining districts that offer pre-K offer less than 25 hours a week in some way, whether that's 2 full days or 3 full days, you know, the districts get very creative how they operate, but 25 or more hours a week is full day, full week.
Well, I'm also thinking in terms of full-time programming means full-time planning as well, and I'm not sure what that.
That's what I was just gonna mention.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicole, I'll let you respond.
We've definitely learned if you're running full-day programming, you really need to have staffing support built in so that staff can come out. There's more prepping, there's more. A pre-K classroom is different than a K classroom. They're going to need to prep things. They're going to need, especially the first few years. We have in some of our locations, not this location, the first year, we don't always start 5 days a week. Sometimes the first year we'll start 4 days, and then the second year we transition to 5. Only because it is a lot the first year, and there does need to be time to come out and prep materials from what we've learned anyway.
Right. And like Mark mentioned earlier, in their full day classrooms, then they're able to offer the allied arts. So typically I don't know if this is how their district does it, but in others, that's a time for the lead teacher in pre-K to have a lunch or their planning time, what have you. In full day programs also, it's required to offer rest time. So sometimes districts will replace the lead teacher during that time with an additional ed tech so that the lead teacher can have planning, you know, whatever contract time is needed for that individual.
So just one other piece around specials. In our programming, our teachers stay with children in specials, especially at the beginning of the year. And I would also say if it's a new program and if it's a school that hasn't had preschool children in their building before, a lot of the teachers that are doing specials may not be used to working with 4-year-olds, and it's very different. So it's just part of that process, right, of learning about working with preschool children.
Yep, great point. Thanks, Nicole.
I joined very late, but I'm sorry for that. But I'm a parent. I'm not an educator. I have 2 questions I was hoping, I'm sorry if they've already been talked about, but one of the concerns in our school union is if in ours, the pre-K and K are together, and we're considering applying for this funding to extend the pre-K to full day. And some of the school board, or one of the school board members has said, how do we address like curriculum readiness for the kindergartners if the program's together and it's full day? Are we going to underserve our kindergartners that are making a leap to first grade? So I'd be curious for anybody's thoughts on that. And then I have a separate question about the funding and the whole program.
So can I ask a follow-up question to what you just said?
Sure.
is it, are you saying it's a multi-age classroom with both pre-K and K kids in it together?
Yeah, it's one classroom with 4 and 5-year-olds.
So I'd have a lot more questions, but the one thing that I would say is if you're moving from a 1.5 years of education because of a part-time pre-K and a full-time K to a 2 years of education, that's going to help curriculum wise. That's more time with kids interacting in a learning environment. And so just based on numbers, I would say that it would probably look like some of the day being all together and some of the day being separated into groups or small group instruction. And if you have the right ed techs and teachers in that room, that probably can happen. It also allows for you to take a really accelerated pre-K and have them get some experiences they might not normally get in pre-K. And it allows you to have a kindergartner who's struggling a little bit to get things that are more geared toward themselves and where they're at. So that kind of meeting kids where they're at, moving them forward from there, that provides some opportunities there as well. So there's definitely some structural things to move through, but I would say in general, 2 years of education is going to be better in a 1.5 years. So
we did not pay Mark for that answer. Thank you, Mark.
Mark, we could have
Nailed
taped
it.
that. That was lovely. Yeah, I think really just to underscore a couple of things that Mark pointed out, you know, obviously it's more time generally for your youngsters, but also just the importance of understanding what's the learning progression across that 2-year period. Where are you headed? So where's the goal as kids are leaving, and recognizing that, you know, all kids are learning at different rates. And so you're going to have to make adjustments. One of the things that all of our teachers have to do a lot of the time is just differentiating for children, no matter what grade level they happen to be in. The other thing that I think is so cool too about multi-age classrooms is the amount of learning that happens just amongst the students in the classroom. The older and the younger learners are such great models for one another. So it's a really nice opportunity for learning to happen in a much more natural way than maybe how we segregate our students a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say too that it's also not really out of the norm. If you think about many districts will do a K1 classroom, right? Or a first, second grade classroom. It's essentially the same thing. We have pre-K classrooms that do 3 and 4-year-olds, right? So really it's no different. And I love the analogy of that Mark provided of, you know, you get more bang for your buck pretty much, right? All around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. I guess I have now 2 more questions, but the one is does anyone from the granting agency provide technical assistance to help write the grant if we were thinking about, like, not write the grant, but like think through the issues that we would want to address in the application?
Right.
Yeah. So because it's a competitive grant, there's
I guess you probably can't do that, right?
a little more regulation around what we can and cannot do. So we try to be as specific as we can in the application itself so that people reading it know what you're being asked to respond to. There will be an informational session, a formal informational session during that window of time when the application period is open. So you can ask questions during that time, and we will go through in much more detail than we did today exactly what we're asking in the application. There's also the opportunity to send written questions during that period, and we will respond to those written questions, and then we post them for all applicants to have access to, because what you're asking, somebody else might not have thought to ask, but it would be equally helpful to them. And then after the grants are awarded, then we try to provide as much technical assistance as we can to support folks with understanding all the pieces, working through the implementation process, because of course lots of questions come up then. So yeah, but we can't provide help with actually writing the grant.
No, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. My other one is regarding the funding. Is it a 1 year? And then I'm anticipating the school board and the principal asking, like how long the funding goes for and what's our plan for after we build this program and then we have to go to the town meeting to get a,
Right. So
future funding in the
Yep.
town budget.
That's a really good question. So in the design of this grant, we've tried to do a couple of things to help encourage the notion of sustainability over time. So when you develop your budget for this grant, you're going to come up with what is it going to cost for this project to actually do it. And then we're going to help you to determine how much state and local allocation per child that's enrolled you would be needing to commit. So there's a certain portion in the formula that's the state's responsibility and a certain portion that's the local level. And for the purposes of this grant, we adjusted the local commitment a little bit so that more grant funding could help support that, so that in the first year, it's less of a lift at the local level for what you're putting in place. But there's still some level of commitment from the local side. And so it's really important that your school board knows what it is that you're moving forward with. And then whatever's remaining, once that's subtracted out, the grant can help support those costs.
Mm-hmm.
And that we did that as a stepping stone, so that it's allowing you to do a lot of the upfront costs that are one-time costs and have the grant help to pay for that, but you're also planning forward for when you're going to have to assume the costs of the programming for the long term. But at that point, when you marry together your state and local allocation, a good deal of that should be able to support that on an ongoing annual basis.
Okay. So wait, so there's state funding when you look to the future, there's state funding on an ongoing basis?
Through the essential programs and services school funding formula, there's an allocation for 4-year-olds for public pre-K built in, and it will depend how much it is, has to do with your own community, your tax base. Some communities have to contribute more than others do, but that formula applies to 4-year-olds attending public pre-K, just like it does to K-12 students.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So I know it's 3 o'clock, and we had said we would bring closure to the session at 3, and I know some of my colleagues, including myself, have to jump off for another meeting at 3. But certainly, if any of you have additional questions, we would be more than happy to answer them. Reach out to us as you're thinking about this opportunity. And we will certainly make sure that you're all notified when the RFA becomes available. And I want to give a special shout out to Mark and Nicole and Shanna, who had to jump off earlier, for coming and sharing a bit about your experience. It's always helpful to have the voices of the folks who are actually doing the work day to day with us. So thank you so much for a little bit of your time.